in terms of what we'll be covering off today, the first thing we'll do is talk about the headwinds and the context that we're operating in at the moment. We'll then move to talking about attraction, which is the first category of activity in your recruitment process, so increasing the pool of candidates that you have to choose from. And then we'll talk about selection, so choosing those from those candidates and predicting who's going to be most successful in your business. Now, we're talking about recruitment and retention. So we then move into a short conversation about performance and motivation. What is it that we can do to motivate the people who work with us and to perform at their best? We'll then talk about some retention figures and look at what's happening out in the landscape, as well as talk about the levers that we can pull to make sure our good staff stay with us and don't move on. And like Kelly and I have both spoken about, there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, but you're free to ask them as you go through and I'll collect them all at once. So let's jump into headwinds. So the context that we're operating in at the moment starts with a bit of a conversation around immigration. So New Zealand for a very long time had very positive net migration numbers. And then with COVID, of course, the borders closed and we had some real difficulty bringing in anyone from overseas. In New Zealand in particular, that can be challenging because there tend to be two types of work where we quite heavily rely on migrant labour. So the first are what I'm going to, if you think kind of your blue collar work, so your horticulture and fruit picking and gathering, some of the less attractive jobs for New Zealanders, we tend to rely quite heavily on migrant labour there. But also because we're a small country, we don't often have highly technical skills that we need in more complex environments. So if we're thinking about software development, kind of as the key example, if you're thinking about anything particularly experienced in the R&D space or in the scientific space and the kind of senior management roles, we tend to buy that talent in from overseas because we have a very, very small pool of candidates here in New Zealand. Now, it's been really difficult to recruit in both of those sectors because of the migration flows over the last couple of years. But there is some good news on the horizon for those of us who have had challenges finding staff. So in the year ending June 2023, so the 12 months previous, Immigration and Stats New Zealand came out about a week ago with their updated migration numbers. And so far, we've had a net migration gain of about 86,000 people, which is very good news and is a significant inflow and increase on migrant numbers compared to the previous couple of years. And June 2022, so the year ending there, we lost about 18,000 people. We had more people leave the country than move here, and the same again in 2021, again because of the border closures and the pandemic. And the year ending June 2020, we had about 85,000 people as a net migration gain. So 85,000 more warm bodies in the country to do the work, to be the pairs of hands and doing work for us and our customers. To give you a sense of those numbers, our pre-pandemic average was about 58,000 more warm bodies a year in the country. So if you've had a difficult couple of years finding staff, definitely the migration pressures will have contributed to that. It was a countrywide issue, not a you-specific issue. And of course, for Queenstown, those pressures can be felt particularly acutely, given the nature of a lot of the industry that happens down your way. But there are some positive signs on the horizon with those significantly increased migration numbers at the moment. The other thing that's been happening is there has been a massive increase in labour costs across the country. Now, I work in this space. I'm dealing with pay and with pay rates pretty often. And even I was surprised to see that the percentage increase in the minimum wage over the last 6 years has been 44%. Now, it's not always that when your minimum wage number increases, everyone else gets the same increase. It's a much blunter tool than that. But certainly if you have people who have been close to the minimum wage and they were on $2 more an hour than someone who is a brand new starter, and now that new starter is only 50 cents behind them, not unreasonably, your more experienced staff might be saying, well, I deliver more than 50 cents an hour more value than this brand new person. I'd like to talk about my pay and my salary as well. So certainly not a rising tide lifts all boats exactly in the same proportion, but it's undeniable that the increase in the minimum wage has increased the cost of labour across the board for many of us. No conversation in New Zealand in the last year or so has been complete without a discussion or a point at least on the cost of living. So for the June year, the CPI increase has been 6%. In the quarters before, so in March and December, it was 6.7% and 7.2% respectively. So the rate at which the cost of living is increasing is slowing. So it's dropped from 7.2 to 6.7, now it's at 6. But we still can buy 6% less now than we could a year ago. So cost of living pressures are easing, or they're slowing, but they're certainly not going away anytime soon. The other piece to this picture too is that we continue to have quite low unemployment rates, although it has increased slightly. So for the June 23 quarter, unemployment across the country was sitting at 3.6%. That was 3.4% in the March and the December quarters previously. So still quite low, but potentially a bit of ease here as we have more people in the country. And of course, there are all of the other economic headwinds that we're facing, which I won't go into today because that's a whole economic conversation. Now, the last thing I thought it would be hopefully interesting and hopefully not alarmist to talk about, but more of a chronic concern rather than acute concern, some of the population demographics that will be changing in New Zealand over the next little while. So today, in terms of workers aged 65 and over compared to workers aged 65 and under, we have a ratio of 4 to 1. So for every one worker who's aged 65 or older, we have 4 workers who are under the age of 65. The reason 65 is the number is that's when superannuation kicks in. I'm not picking on people in their mid-60s with these figures, but we know that we have it's a 4 to 1 ratio of people who are under 65. The reason that matters is usually our bodies wear out as we get older, right? So we have more aches and pains, we can move slower, we're potentially less fit, we might be more subject to falls or to injuring ourselves. And so for businesses in an environment where they rely on physical fitness and potentially pace or potentially endurance and stamina, there are some concerns heading your way as our population ages. Because in 20 years, there are going to be 2 workers under the age of 65 for every worker over the age of 65, which means that we're going to have a bit of a bulge in terms of people who are aged 65 and over, but there are going to be fewer people aged under 65 in terms of availability for some of those harder wearing jobs or industries that require a bit more manual labour. So not something necessarily to worry about today, but definitely a change that's coming down the pipe. And I thought it would be interesting to add to this conversation as we're talking about headwinds we'll be facing now and in the next little while. So having set a mixed picture or a mixed mood for what's going on at the moment, let's move into the positive stuff and talk about what it is that we can be doing around recruiting and retaining staff in our organisations. So the first point to make is I really, really encourage you to know what it is that you want before you go looking. Just like if you go to the supermarket when you're hungry, you'll end up making potentially very reactive decisions and getting lots of junk food and lots of snacks. If you go and recruit or go to market when you're desperate to find someone, you're liable to be taken in by kind of the first person who comes along who looks like they might be able to solve your problems. And that can leave you a bit more open to being not taken advantage of or swindled, but certainly swayed by people who've got a good chat or people who are feel like a good fit for your organization, potentially without doing your due diligence. So unlike or exactly like grocery shopping, don't go shopping when you're hungry, don't go to market when you're desperate to find someone. Take the time to do a bit of prep work and think about what it is that you need. So a job description is a document which describes the key tasks, responsibilities, skills, experience, or qualifications that are important for a particular job. So they are mandatory to include in your employment agreement. So whether you have one before you go recruiting or whether you write one at the end of the recruitment process, either way you're going to need one. So you may as well take the time at the start of the process because that will be useful to you as you go through it and also useful to candidates. Now, we recommend keeping them short. 2 to 3 pages is usually plenty. Honestly, once it's been signed in the employment agreement and then put away in a drawer somewhere, people very rarely refer back to their job description. It's a legal requirement and it's useful during the recruitment process, but it's not usually a kind of a day-to-day referral document. So keep it short and simple. And often that means keeping your points in your job description quite broad. So if you have a line in there that says effectively manage a sales team to achieve growth targets, that's a perfect line to describe the responsibilities of a sales manager or of a business development manager. So you don't have to list off every single task that someone can be expected to do in a job. That would be impossible. You'd need 1 million pages, but make sure your points are general and cover off the key responsibilities, but you don't have to be too specific because the details of how a job works and what happens in the day-to-day live outside of the job description. They don't tend to live in here. I would also really, really strongly recommend that you don't include specific KPIs. So a specific KPI for a sales manager might be increase revenue by 20% for the 2023-2024 financial year. Now, that's a really good goal to give your sales manager. It's important that we set clear expectations for our staff. But if you put it in your job description, which then forms a part of their employment agreement, which is a contractual legal document, if you want to change those KPIs, you have to consult with them about changes to their employment agreement, and then you have to reissue a new employment agreement with a new job description. It's a waste of time. There's no need to have them in JDs. Keep your KPIs in your performance reviews or tie them to your commissions or your bonus payments. Definitely have them, but the job description is not the right place for them to go. Your JD should be a description of the work that's required as a part of this role, along with key skills and experiences. It isn't a place for the management of business processes like performance reviews or like KPIs. And lastly, I said before they're not living documents, but do make sure that you update them over time. The reason that is important is if you end up in a dispute with an employee about what their job is or what you're asking them to do, maybe they're underperforming, maybe they're not staying in their lane and kind of, expanding the realm of what they're trying to manage. It can be really difficult to manage those conversations if their job description's 5 years old and hasn't been changed, even though their job has changed 2 or 3 times during that time. It also means that when we come to potentially downsize your operation, if there's consultation that you need to have in place around shrinking your headcount if you're having a tough time in the economic environment, or for whatever reason, having outdated job descriptions makes your HR support job really, really hard, because there isn't a current kind of lay of the land of who does what and who looks after what tasks and responsibilities. So a little bit of future proofing. Do make sure that you're updating your job descriptions over time, especially when people's jobs actually change. You don't have to do it every 3 months, but maybe every year check in and see if any of your T's and C's need to be updated. So now that you've got a job in your business, you've got a job description, it's clear what it is that you're asking for, you know what the skills and competencies are that will mean this person will succeed, you're now going to market. And I thought it would be useful for us to talk a little bit about what is happening in today's job market, because it has been very volatile over the last 18 months, and keeping your finger on the pulse has been challenging if you're not constantly in market, which many of us won't be. So I pulled a graph that Seek shared as part of their kind of employment updates that they release on a regular basis. And I thought this was a really interesting piece of research. So from their August 2023 employment update, they've shown us what candidate supply looks like based on kind of people who are applying for jobs on the Seek website, and looked at the number of job ads. So we can see that in 2020, when the pandemic hit, of course, and borders closed, there was a massive drop-off in job ads, so the dark blue line are your job ads, and a massive spike in candidate availability, which is what we would expect to see, right? As businesses closed and made people redundant and reduced headcount, we would expect to see that there would be fewer jobs available and more candidates available. Now, between kind of 2021 and 2022, that reversed. There were more job ads than there were candidate supply, partly due to the fact that we had fewer migrants coming into the country. There were just fewer warm bodies around. And so there was a period of time where it was a really excellent market to be a job seeker, because there were fewer of you and there were way more jobs on the go. Now, in 2023, that period of tightness or lack of supply in the labour market has reduced. We're almost at a point where the number of jobs and the number of candidates is closely matching again, which is encouraging. But just to give you a sense of what that volatility has been like, first we had too many candidates for about a year, then we had too many jobs and not enough candidates, and now we're starting to meet in the middle again. The other thing I wanted to share was some research from our SME Employer and Employment Insights report that we published about 8 weeks ago. If you'd like a copy of this, let me know, I can send it around to you. But I'm talking about some research that looks at HR challenges, benefits, and priorities for the year ahead. So when we spoke to nearly 400 decision makers in businesses, so business owners and business managers, and we asked them what their biggest HR challenge in 2022 was, more than half of them said that their biggest challenge was finding enough staff to fill their vacancies. So if this is you, if you've had a hard time finding staff, it's not a you problem, it was an everyone problem. And certainly that's kind of backed up in the SEEK data, where we see that there were way more jobs than there were people, and so there was inevitably going to be a bit of a challenge finding people to come into your business. When we spoke to these decision makers about priorities for the financial year ahead, again, more than half of them said that retaining existing employees was a key priority of theirs. It was actually the second most common priority, just behind keeping existing staff engaged and performing, which I think came in at just over 57%. So there's a real focus at the moment on retaining existing employees, which means there's going to be a fair amount of competition from businesses who can afford or who do have the creativity and other levers to pull to keep staff engaged. And so if you're attending this session hoping you'll get some insights, I think you're in a good place. And one of the questions that we often get asked, because we have 1,300 clients across New Zealand and Australia, and we're working with businesses around benefits and around their terms and conditions all the time, we often get asked, what are other businesses doing? What's common for people to offer in terms of benefits? Am I, as a small business owner, being too generous, or am I being too stingy? Kind of what's typical? And so when we talk to our clients, and again, the survey of about 400 business owners and decision makers, nearly more than 2/3 of them offered flexible working arrangements as a benefit to their employees. So this is the most common benefit offered. That includes everything from part-time working hours through to flexible start and finish times, so maybe starting at 7 a.m. and finishing at 3 p.m. And it also covers remote working arrangements or working from home setup. So maybe that's allowing people to work remotely 1 day a week or 5 days a week. Flexible working arrangements are a very common benefit offered, which also squares up with SEEK's data, which says that more than 2/3 of candidates are looking for flexible working arrangements in their next role. Second most common benefit offered was training and development, again over 2/3. That covered everything from on-the-job learning and training through to mentoring and coaching through to kind of formal learning opportunities. So it's not that everyone's getting 2 weeks off a year to attend a bunch of swanky conferences, but more than 2/3 of small businesses are very mindful about the importance of training and development and are offering some form of training to their staff at the moment. Interestingly, the third most common benefit offered was a personal mobile phone or a plan that staff member could use. I was surprised to see this come out. I wouldn't have expected this to be as common, but personal mobile phones and personal mobile plans are, more than half of small businesses offer them as a benefit to their employees, so something to keep in mind. So having looked at the market, we're now going to talk about the tools that you can pull to get the biggest pool of candidates to apply for your role. Now, recruitment is kind of a big umbrella that covers a lot of different activities, and attraction is everything that you do to get the most number of people applying for your job or your vacancy. So it's the first half of the recruitment pipeline. So we'll talk about it first, and then we'll move on to talking about selection tools. So it's really important right now, as we are seeing a reduction in the gap between how many candidates and how many roles there are, but still a bit of a squeeze, that you're being very creative to get eyes on your brand and your vacancies and your opportunities. So the first thing that most businesses will do is they'll put a job ad out, right? So whether this is on SEEK, whether it's on Trade Me or posting in your industry associations, a job ad is a good way to kind of let people know that there's an opportunity for them to look at. But if all you're doing is posting a job ad, again, whether that's on SEEK or on Trade Me or where have you, you're missing a lot of opportunities to get eyes on your application, and so on your vacancy, and therefore you're missing opportunities to increase your chances of getting the person who's going to be best for the role. Now, if you are in market or thinking about going into market, I'd really recommend you have a look at SEEK's Laws of Attractions tool, which I've linked here, but if you Google SEEK Laws of Attraction, it will come up. I think every 3 months or every 6 months, survey thousands of candidates across all ages, demographics, industries, geographic locations, levels of seniority to understand what it is those candidates are looking for. And there is some really compelling data around, the points I mentioned earlier around appetite for flexible working and so on. But have a look at what candidates in your industry and in your location are looking for, because that will inform your thinking around what benefits you want to offer and how you talk about your opportunity with your business and why someone would choose to work for you rather than someone else. So I'd recommend the Seek Laws of Attractions tool as a first step. The other thing you might want to do is have a careers page on your website. So if you do have a website, then great. If you don't, you can zone out for the next 20 seconds and check your email or send a text. But having a careers page on your website can be a good way to capture attention from people who are already looking at your business, right? So whether that's people who are looking for work or people who regularly check your site because they're in the industry, take advantage of the audience that you already have, which is people on your website, rather than trying to create a brand new audience from scratch if you were just posting on Seek or on TradeMe. You also might want to have a think about if running a social media campaign. So Facebook is a very hit and miss method for advertising job ads, but Instagram, TikTok, any of the other social media platforms have ways to get your ad in front of people. And certainly it's been a really useful tool for a number of clients I've worked with, but I would recommend you do a bit of research around setting up an effective campaign. Otherwise you'll be throwing kind of good time after bad. It's not always as straightforward as it sounds. The other point to note here is algorithms with Facebook and TikTok on the last kind of 12 to 18 months have changed to prioritize video content. A lot of that is in response to TikTok, which is a social media platform that has exploded in the last couple of years. If you haven't heard of it, you might be one of the only ones in the country. But be aware that just posting an ad with a link to your vacancy on TradeMe or on Seek is unlikely to get the attention that you would like. And one of the important tools here is it's a pay to play environment, right? So if you're not putting some spend behind your job ad or your advertisement on these social media sites, it's very unlikely to get more than a few eyeballs over it. So if you are engaging in social media, do it properly, put a bit of cash behind it. Otherwise, just don't engage. It's it can be a bit of a time suck if you're not set up to take advantage of it. The other thing to consider are more creative avenues for getting candidates in one place, like job fairs. So at the start of this year, we had a number of hospitality clients who all operate in a similar precinct. They normally compete for the same wait staff and bar staff, right? Because they're all hospitality venues. But they got together kind of independently and said, we're having a really shit time right now. It's really hard to find candidates. Let's get a job fair in place. And so what they did was they booked out a venue. They all advertised to their own kind of audiences and used their networks, and all attended a job fair and got hundreds and hundreds of candidates through the doors so that they could be meeting and greeting and meeting people and taking advantage of the exponential power of having, I think it was 5 or 6 businesses in one place advertising jobs rather than individually trying to chase these people. So have a think about whether you could collaborate with another business in your area or with your association to put something like a job fair together, even a virtual job fair where you can be engaging with audiences remotely and asking questions, or with candidates remotely, could be something to think about. The other thing too is proactive search. So this has been the domain of recruitment agencies for a very, very long time, but the increased uptake of LinkedIn, particularly among kind of professional and white collar industries, means you can pretty quickly look for candidates who you might want to reach out to and have a conversation in your industry. If it's not something you have time for, that's totally cool, but I would encourage you to think about where you could be spending some time finding people and approaching them for your vacancy, rather than relying on a more passive strategy where you put your ad out there and the audience comes to you. And the last thing to mention here is the value of employee referral programs. So if your business is large enough, or if you have, if it's appropriate, have a think about putting a referral program in place where if you have a vacancy and it's filled by someone who one of your employees has referred to apply, after 3 months or 6 months, your employee gets a cash bonus, normally kind of in the range of $500 to $2,000. If you do have a referral program, I would encourage you to make it conditional on the employee who's been hired passing their trial period or passing their probation. Otherwise, you'll pay your employee $500 for the referral, and then 2 weeks later you have to fire their mate who's a bit rubbish. But have a think about whether this is a tool that would be useful to you to get your employees looking for people amongst their networks to refer in for jobs rather than you doing all the heavy lifting. So we've talked about attraction. So we've now got a huge pool of candidates who've applied for our job, and that pool has increased because we've been clever and we've maybe been proactive about getting people to apply. We now have to choose from this pool of candidates and decide who among them is the most likely to be successful at this role. So selection tools are anything that you use to assess candidates and decide that they're going to be the person that you bring into the business. And the purpose is to predict who will be successful in the role, right? We don't want to hire someone who's going to be a dud hire. We want to hire someone who's going to be awesome and show up on time and land with a bang and be proactive and get things done. So they're all the common tools: CV screening, phone and face-to-face interviews. Psychometric testing is less common, but beginning to be used a bit more. These tend to fall into 2 categories. So personality profiling is anything that looks at some of the kind of persistent traits or characteristics that are enduring that we have, like I'm always going to be chatty. I'm not usually going to be an introvert. I'm typically pretty extroverted. So any test that assesses kind of your person or your characteristics of a person. And then you have ability tests. So typically these are like assessing someone's verbal capacity, assessing their numerical ability. Those tend to be more skills that can be learned and less about kind of who you are as a human. And then obviously references. So face-to-face interviews are, in New Zealand, the most common selection tool. I expect everyone on this call would have either attended a face-to-face interview looking for a job or used them as a tool when recruiting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how useful these tools actually are and where they can let you down, so that once you've got your amazing pool of candidates, you're making useful, informed decisions about how you are assessing who is most likely to be successful in your business. Now, a word before we get started: there is no perfect way to predict who will be successful in a job or in a business. It is impossible to get to 100% predictability, so you will always have some dud hires. And that's less of a criticism of the way that you recruit. It's because humans are complicated and jobs are complicated, and there's kind of no perfect way to predict who'll be successful. But we can get closer to predicting consistently who will be successful at work. Now, if you have a selection tool like a reference check, and if it has a score of 0, it is no better than randomly selecting someone and predicting that they will be good or bad at their job. If you have a tool, a predictability score of 1, it means that 100% of the time perfectly predicts who will be successful and who won't. So a 0 is no better than random. You may as well not use it. And a 1 is our impossible perfect predictive ability. So let's look at some common selection tools and understand what they can be useful for and where we might need to compensate. So when I was looking at research around useful selection tools, the most common or the most recent research comes from kind of the early 2000s. And I was trying to find something more recent because, you know, early 2000s is 20 years ago. Surely there's been something more recent come out. But there was a lot of attention in the 80s and 90s as we were getting a lot more interest in and money behind recruiting people into more complex organizations. And that money in that time was invested in trying to understand how we do choose people to be successful at work. And there hasn't been any research really done since the early 2000s because we have answered these questions. There are no more interesting kind of research pieces here, and so there's no more research happening because we know what tools are better at predicting success at work and which tools are less good at predicting who's going to be successful at work. So this research comes from a meta-study from a journal in 2001. And on the left-hand side, we've got the selection measures or the tools that we're using. And on the right-hand side, we've got the ability score. So the selection tools that are best predictive of success at work in order are cognitive ability and integrity scoring. So that's a combination of like kind of an IQ test or testing someone's intellectual capacity and looking at their conscientiousness, so how likely they are to do the right thing, show up on time, finish what they've been given, not skive off, all that kind of stuff. After that, we've then got the combination of cognitive ability testing and structured interviews. So a structured interview is an interview where you're asking preset questions, and you're asking pretty much the same questions of every candidate that comes through. So you're getting the same information from all your candidates, and you can compare and contrast. Third most useful is the combination of cognitive ability and work sample tests. So a work sample test is where you ask someone to do a task they would actually be asked to do at work. So in the HR context, if I'm recruiting for an HR advisor, I might give them a couple of fake scenarios and ask them to write an email response back to the manager who's asking for help managing a difficult employee or starting off a restructure. In a cafe, it might be asking them to make a couple of coffees. In a sales environment, it might be asking them to do a short pitch as a part of their recruitment process, basically getting them to do any task that accurately reflects what their day-to-day work will be like. So after we have stopped combining tests, fourth most predictive are your work sample tests on their own. So getting someone to make a coffee or do a sales pitch or write an email to a customer. Then we've got cognitive ability testing on their own, how smart someone is, what their skills are. And then structured interviews are sixth most predictive of success at work. Now, you'll notice that the difference between the best possible combination of tests, which are your cognitive ability testing combined with kind of conscientiousness testing, is kind of 0.14 better than structured interviews, which is pretty good. So the structured interview, the fact that it's so common is actually quite encouraging. It's a pretty useful tool to predict how successful someone will be at work, which means that in 51 of 100 cases, if that person does well on the interview, they will also do well on the job. And if they don't do well on the interview, then they won't do well at the job. So quite a lot better than random, but certainly not that perfect score of 1 that we would like to be looking for. So if you are recruiting at the moment, have a think about the way that you interview candidates. If you just get them to come into your business, have a chat, feel out their vibe, ask about their home life, that is not an effective way to predict who will be successful at work. You're likely to end up hiring people who you like, people who are like you, people who are quite good at presenting themselves well. You're missing out on a chance to get closer to understanding how they compare to different candidates, understanding their competencies and their skills, and really diving into the qualities or the capabilities that mean they're likely to be successful. I also wanted to share the 6 least useful assessment tools or selection tools to give you a sense of where these sit in the scale. The article contained, I think it was 22 different selection methods, so I'm just showing you top 6 and bottom 6 here. So references are better than random at predicting success at work, but they're only a 0.26. So that's nearly half as useful as a structured interview is. So if you have someone who does really well at their structured interview, but their references aren't amazing, the math says that you should trust how they performed in the structured interview and not trust the reference, because a structured interview is better at predicting success at work than a reference is. Years of job experience, we have a big drop down again, better than random, but not as good as you would expect. How long someone has been doing something isn't very predictive of how good they or how well they will be able to do it in your environment. Interests, pretty close to random. Years of education, pretty close to random. As someone who spent 5 years at university, I was shocked to see these statistics, but good to know what the research says. Graphology is handwriting, so whether someone does or doesn't have tidy handwriting is close to random in predicting how successful they'll be. And age is a little bit worse than random at predicting how successful someone will be. So have a think about how you are choosing your candidates into your business, where you can build in work samples, make sure your interviews are structured. If you're interested in cognitive ability testing, there are a bunch of providers out there. So get in touch if you'd like some recommendations, but you do have that as an option. And where possible, stay away from relying on things like the number of years of experience they have, their years of education, how old they are, and be a bit wary of references because they're not very predictive. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes left, which is good for timing. So I'll jump into the second half of this, which is about retention. And before we get into retention, I wanted to share some turnover statistics with you so you can have a look at potentially how your business or your organization compares to others in your industry. So this data is taken from our MyHR database from September last year to the end of August. I wanted it to be nice and recent for you. And this is across the 28,000 employees employees in New Zealand that we have across all of the industries and the locations that we service. So the industry with the highest employee turnover, somewhat unsurprisingly, is accommodation food services. So this is restaurants, it's bars, it's catering companies, hotels, motels, anywhere that provides accommodation or food services, either on-site or off-site. So employee turnover here was 111%. So every year, more than 100% of their employees kind of leave and need to be replaced. So tenure is likely to be kind of measured in months, not years in this industry. Second most common are admin and support services. So think about cleaners, about printing suppliers, about shared office spaces, anywhere that provides admin or support services to business, coming in at 76%, and in the construction industry at 51%, significantly down from there. So I've got 2 slides here. I'll leave this one up for another 5 seconds in case you wanted to take any notes. But basically turnover is pretty high is the key takeaway for these industries here. Certainly with accommodation food services, that's always in our top 2, if not our top 3 in terms of turnover, so that's not unusual. But certainly in construction, retail, agriculture, forestry, fishing, kind of healthcare and social assistance, I don't know of any business that aims for a turnover rate of 45%. That's pretty painful, having to replace 40% of your staff every year, so certainly not something to target. And then jumping into the next slide, here are the other industries we have here. So starting at the bottom this time, public administration and safety are kind of councils or like the Board of Plumbers, gas fitters and drain layers, I think is one of our clients. So any organisation that's tasked with kind of managing public safety or infrastructure has a really low turnover rate compared to the other industries that we support. That's pretty typical. Public sector tends to have lower turnover than the private sector, consistently across many years, but certainly 26% is still quite painful. I mean, imagine having to replace 1 in 4 of your team every year. That's a pretty high churn. And then, of course, we kind of head up through the ranks. So 32% for postal and warehousing, 35% for electricity, gas, water and waste, up to 40% for manufacturing. And again, 30% churn is pretty high. Most kind of best practice numbers are sort of between 15, like 10 to 20%, kind of hovering around 15. So there's certainly a lot of movement out there, which is causing a lot of disruption and difficulty, I would say. No one likes recruiting. It's a pain to have to restaff into your business. So having looked at our turnover data, let's talk about retention kind of by way of performance and motivation. And I wanted to talk about these particular points because when people are engaged and motivated and doing good work, they are far less likely to leave. So unless we understand what it is that drives performance and what it is that motivates people, it's going to be very difficult to pull kind of levers or to make meaningful changes at work to reduce the chances of people turning over. So this is an oldie but a goodie. We know that performance at work is a function of someone's ability combined with their motivation, combined with their opportunity to perform. And I'll break this down quickly, but you're welcome to come back to the slide later if you want to spend more time here. So a person's ability is a combination of their skills, their IQ, their experience, their EQ, anything that means that they have the tools in their toolkit to do the job. I can't be a plumber. I do not have the skills. So if you don't have the foundational ability, you will never be able to perform, which makes sense. I would be a shit plumber because I can't plumb. That's not a skill set that I have. But you can have the shiniest Ferrari in your garage in the world. If you're never motivated to take it out and actually drive it around, you won't ever win any races. You've got a fabulous set of tools, but you're not doing anything with it. So motivation is also really important. And the motivation's a tricky one because it's very hard to quantify. But the kind of one of the long-standing theories of motivation relates to how connected people feel, how competent they feel, and how related they feel to the people around them. Connected, related, competent, and autonomous, that last one should say. So I'll update that in the slides before I send it out. But if someone feels connected, if they feel like they know why they're doing their job and they've got a good team around them, if they feel competent enough to do the job, they've got the skills and the tools they need, they know where to find help, and they feel autonomous, like they can make that work happen and they can do it on their own terms, those are really high predictors of people feeling really motivated. The other pieces that come into play here sometimes just are around your personal drive, if you're very driven to succeed, and if you've got an appetite for career growth, you're going to be more motivated at work. So you've got a fabulous Ferrari, you're really motivated to drive it, and to punish this metaphor a bit more, if you have a track that's really pockmarked with lots of potholes, if you don't have a good crew and a good support team around you, you're never going to be winning races. And so the opportunity for you to succeed is as important as you having the capabilities and the motivation to do it yourself. An opportunity is where we as managers and business owners can have the most impact, because it's all around the context and the environment that our team are working in. So if we have clear objectives and outcomes for our employees, if we give them the right tools for the job, where they're working in a supportive environment, they've got a manageable workload, they feel safe at work, they can raise any concerns, ask any questions, that means that the opportunity component of performance is taken care of, right? If we've got capable, smart people who feel connected, they feel competent, they feel autonomous, they've got a bit of room to do work as they want to, and they're in an environment that we have a lot of control over, which is supportive and accessible and realistic, performance is going to be high. So when we're thinking about retaining people, we want to be thinking about where we can kind of tick off all of these 3 boxes or these 3 areas, because that will give people the best chance to perform and be successful, which is a key predictor of whether they're likely to stay in a job or not. Now, we come to this piece around the 2-factor theory that I want to touch on, because it's important for framing how we think about the things that we can control. Now, Hertzberg's theory was developed in the 1960s. It's another oldie but a goodie, and it certainly stood the test of time. So while some components could be modernized, it's pretty useful for thinking about work. So when we think about what motivates people in a work context, there are kind of 2 components we should be paying attention to. And on the left-hand side, we've got what are called hygiene factors. So just like if someone showers every day, you don't notice, but if they weren't showering every day, you'd pretty quickly see that their hair was greasy and their skin was a mess and they were sticky and smelly. The hygiene factors are things that we need to take care of in order to avoid dissatisfaction. So it's things like being paid on time. It's things like having company policies that make sense, having an office that's not moldy and has like good air conditioning, making sure that their chair is comfortable. It's all that kind of stuff. Whereas no one goes home and goes, oh my goodness, I love my office. It's got perfect air conditioning and some natural light and there's no mold in the toilets. Hooray, I'm so motivated. These factors don't drive satisfaction, but they do reduce dissatisfaction. And something that's often surprising to see is that pay frequency obviously is in here. If you're getting paid erratically and you can't ever rely on your paycheck, that's really demotivating. But actually being paid fairly removes dissatisfaction, but being paid well or generously does not drive a proportionate increase in job satisfaction, because it's a hygiene factor. We can be unhappy with our pay, but if we think we're paid fairly, that just brings us to a baseline of not demotivated. So when we think about job satisfaction, we then come to the motivation factors on the right-hand side. So all of these drive job satisfaction in a positive way, rather than just removing dissatisfaction like the hygiene factors do. So they're things like feeling recognized for the work that we do, getting a sense of achievement from the work that we're managing, feeling responsible, having access to promotion opportunities, learning and development. All of the good stuff will drive job satisfaction. And so we need to be making sure we're taking care of both sides here. Hygiene factors reduce dissatisfaction and are the basics, and the motivation factors improve satisfaction, and it's kind of the cool and the awesome stuff. So you can have a workplace, and this becomes a bit of a trope when we think about startups and millennial work environments, where there's always snacks in the fridge and there's a ping pong table and massage chairs and all of the like awesome cool stuff. But they're environments where your pay is very uncertain. There are potentially massively high deadlines and uncertainty around the work, and maybe the supervision's not amazing because the founders of the company are really busy. So no amount of sexy, cool stuff will remove the dissatisfaction we feel if kind of the hygiene components of working aren't in place. So where to now? If we're thinking about retention, what are the levers that we can control? So like we've talked about, you can do a better job of choosing people who are very capable. So using your recruitment process to assess their skills and their motivation. And then we as business owners can affect the environment and the motivation side of things by making sure that we are providing people with an opportunity to succeed. We're taking care of the work environment. There aren't any hygiene factors that are missing. Make sure that you do have the toilets unclogged if that's an issue in your building, and making sure that there are those satisfaction pieces as well. Now, when we think about putting all of that together in a picture, your best shot at successfully retaining your employees is having a compelling answer to the question, why would someone choose to work for you instead of your competitor? So yes, pay is important. Making sure that you're paying people fairly and that they're not dissatisfied with their pay is important. But it's also all of the other factors that we've discussed today. So is there really meaningful impact that your work has? Are you working, not all of us can be, saving babies and working on cancer treatments. But is there a story you can tell about the importance of your work to make it clear the impact that your back office worker who does your accounts receivable has on the fact that you're building new homes in a really remote part of the country, or whatever the connection might be? Have a clear sense of the impact of what you do and talk about it to your team so it feels alive for them. Do you have a really awesome team vibe or culture? Is there, and I don't mean, do you have pizza Fridays? That's nice, but it's not everything. But does your team genuinely really look out for each other? Is there a really strong sense of camaraderie and a really clear commitment to succeeding as a team? If there is, that's incredibly valuable and incredibly powerful. Make sure to name it and talk about it with your existing team as well as with people who you're recruiting and trying to bring into the business. Are there really meaningful development opportunities? And even if that's not paid formal training, do you have really senior, really capable people in your business that your team could be learning from? So internal mentoring opportunities. Again, when you're recruiting, being able to say, well, look, we're a small business, so maybe we don't have the pay packages of our larger competitors, but we have some of the leading experts in our field, and you'll have a chance to learn from them. And so we think that's a meaningful reason why you choose to work here. Likewise, if you have really interesting work or job content, if you have a really large contract with a large company, and so you get to do a massive amount of really technical, interesting work that maybe other businesses like you don't get to do, talk about that. Like if your work is interesting, that's a reason for people to come and work for you, because they have interesting stuff to do during their day-to-day. And then this lifestyle piece. So if you do have flexible working arrangements, if you do allow people to work from home a day or two a week, if you're happy for people to work on glide time, so I tend to work like 10 till 6:30 because that suits my lifestyle, so that's something that is meaningful to me. If there are lifestyle elements here that you can promote and talk about to your existing team, and when you're recruiting, you'll have an easier time kind of retaining people who work for your business currently, as well as going to market with kind of a compelling offer. So we are just about bang on time, coming up 1:50. As I said, that there's plenty of time for questions. So I'm happy to jump out of share my screen so that I can actually see any of the questions that have come through. But please pop them through if you haven't already, and we can have a conversation. Give me 2 seconds as I navigate my way back to the Zoom screen. Oh. I'll give you a couple of seconds to get some questions through, and if there aren't any, then we can wrap up and I'll let you get back to your days.
Sylvie, I've got one.
Yeah, jump in. What's your question?
It happens in Queenstown quite a lot just because of the nature of where we are. What is the balance between offering an amazing, flexible working environment and living in Queenstown, and you move to Queenstown and you move south for the lifestyle, versus the pay? Like, is that up to the individual in which we're recruiting to balance that up, or how much value basically does each employer want to put within that lifestyle piece? How much is that off, or is that per individual?
I'd love to give you a dollar figure for it. And if I could, I'd be a psychic and I'd be earning millions. I think what's really hard about that question is there is obviously a value to the lifestyle that you can have in Queenstown, and we hear anecdotal and very well established stories for why people choose to move down south and why they choose a lifestyle. The difficulty is that because that's a job satisfaction component, people love that, right? It's better for our lives, it's better for our well-being, it's better for our job satisfaction. That kind of sits in our motivating factors piece. But pay is a hygiene factor. So there is no amount of amazing anything, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's perks and benefits, whether it's training and development, that can make up for someone being dissatisfied with their pay. And the question is, what you're asking is, how do you close that gap, right? And it's very much up to the individual. What a person, I'm massively generalizing, but what a person in their 20s with no responsibilities thinks is fair pay will be a bit different to someone who's in their 40s with a mortgage and 3 kids and, who's kind of eyeing up retirement in the next 20 years. So it really is about being really clued into what the market is paying. So if someone goes, I want 20% more than what's typical for someone in my job, you can go, that's unrealistic and you are being unreasonable. It's not us as your employer being unreasonable, but also have a sense of kind of the other factors around pay equity. So in your organization, are you paying fairly kind of at all layers of the hierarchy? Are you paying fairly for jobs that aren't the same? Because there isn't a way to put a value on lifestyle. People with a lifestyle are more satisfied, but people who are unhappy with their pay are dissatisfied. And so they're almost two separate questions. It's really hard to make them equate because they do different things for our happiness.
Oh,
it's a good one though. I'll jump into questions, bear with me. Heidi, kia ora Heidi, thank you for joining us today, says, do you have links or examples for integrity testing in the recruitment process? Yep, I sure do. There's a couple of providers I can recommend. So Heidi, what I'll do is if you can drop me an email after the session, I'm Sylvie at myhr.works. I can send you a couple of examples. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to have a chat and just see what might be suitable for your situation. So my email again, Sylvie, SYLVIE, at myhr.works, and we can have a conversation. Gabriella, kia ora Gabriella, thank you for joining us today, says, can you please recommend some cognitive ability and integrity testing tools? Yeah, I sure can. If you just drop me an email, I can give you a link to some providers and maybe ask some questions about what you might be looking for. That's totally fine. Kelly, those are all our questions. So shall we wrap up and give everyone 6 minutes back in their day?
Yeah, I agree. Nice. That was really interesting, and the selection data I found that really interesting as to what actually works best. So when you think back of all the different interviews I've ever done, I'm like, oh wow, I shouldn't have done that.
No. Well, thank you so much for organising today. Lovely to speak to you as always. And we'll make sure the recording and slides are available afterwards for our participants too.
Perfect. And so everyone will have access to those. We'll send them all out. And if they've got any direct questions, just feel free to email Sylvie, and or if you didn't get her email, come through to me and then I'll flick you on to Sylvie.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, everyone. Go and enjoy a windy day.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Sylvie.